Hi, I'm Joshua and I'm an INTP, and thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on Being and Existence Part 2, or at least that will be the title of this video. The topic and the nature will be a clarification and elucidation on what it is I was necessarily trying to convey and the initial creation of the previous video. And I do not think that I explicated necessarily what it was I was trying to say in the most clearest manner that I could, for there was a very long train of thought that led me to the final postulation and conclusion in that video, and in hindsight it probably should have been partitioned in greater segments for people to be able to find the coherency and consistency in those thoughts. But what I was trying to say was that we are fundamentally limited. I went through a great deal of detail to explicate specifically what those limitations were, and by way of knowledge in our existence and what constituted being per se by our perceptive schematizations as people in respects to other organisms, and our greater connection and associations with mammals and other organisms, that this is a consistent scheme and model that is out in nature that should not be very surprising and shocking to one, how we are not very different. And I do not want to take and make a dethronement of man's place in the universe, but to bring some sobriety to it and put a necessary distance and have a much more vigilant and watchful eye for the things that pose as items of sacredity, or being the ideological precepts and base notions at which we should live by, that all of Western philosophy was not a contradiction, but in the Hegelian sense, a necessary movement towards a maturation in thought, to where there should be a time coming where we realize that we are not the rational animal. We are subjective beings per se, with a need for objectivity, that we are dualistic in nature, that the rational dichotomies that should be made for that which we quantify and investigate and do through logical means by way of ordering and structuring our patterns of action and thought in respect to what we find to be true in the world. But the bounds that we have crossed and overstepped in this insistent game of one-upmanship of the self is being completely pernicious to the true mode of existence that we can attain and have as sentient beings that are of a evolutionary history. That is what I was trying to communicate in that video, that being is all that one can be, and that it's not something very really, because I have been concerned with the question of meaning and fulfillment, and I've been concerned with the aspects of cognition and perception that makes up reality as a whole for us as human beings, and I take and make a microcosm of that in the individual level, and the typological analyses that I do, but that the main motif and item of concern is being and meaning, existence. I am an existentialist, and I'm a material phenomenologist. I am also a budding scientist and specifically a physicist, but I am a human first and a humanist at heart and innately. So my interest in call is to mankind, and as being trying to understand what it is to exist and use my intellect and my rationality to help one better understand what can be expected and what constitutes sound thought and reason. And it is that, for me, there are necessary limitations to account for. There are very real existential burdens that are placed upon us that one should, at every turn and onset, be willing to face what is reality and accept very really the impotence and the ineptness to existence without becoming cynical, jaded, or misanthropic, as it is a fundamental tenet of human existence to be social at the core. We cannot stand for hate of one another, and I mean a hate insofar as it is not as if we will never have a contention per se, but the misanthropy that exists in all cultures and in most modes of spiritual thought. And what I mean is this when I say that every system of philosophy and religion to this point has said that there is something wrong with mankind. And I say that I agree that mankind is not divine, and mankind is not the completely noble moral agents that it has been postulated and idealized to be. But I think that that is a great point of dissension and even poisonous and deriding sort of anthemum that can be interjected into one's experience to constantly have them at a complete hate for existence and themselves, even if it is not explicated in very implicit and costly ways. And I know that people as evolutionary things are not angels necessarily, and I don't think that there is anything wrong with that. I think that it's foolish and will not lead to any sort of true benefit or gain to ignore the fact that we are that we can be selfish, that we can be ruthless, that we can be self-absorbed, that we can be egotistical, that we can be myopic, that we can be short-sighted, that we are weak and completely impotent in the face of nature and its dominion per se, and must buttress ourselves with culture. There are so many things that are hard about existence, but it is my stance and my thought that it is only the acceptance of these things as realities and not necessarily devils that really leads and helps us as agents in societies move to a greater beyond. That this consistent need for one-upmanship, insofar as that one constantly has to lose themselves, find themselves, create themselves, or gain themselves, and cannot just be, is the seat of a lot of a seat for a room for nihilism, a room for totalitarian regimes, a seat for the room for much of the malevolent agencies that we find constantly seeping into our cultures and our world. I don't know why it is difficult for people to conceive that there is a bent of rascality in them, insofar as that they're not the nicest things and they're not the best intending things and they're not completely benevolent. I do not think you can even be good nor benevolent until you very much realize that there is something fundamental to your nature that's not good at all. I don't think that you can have autonomy over yourself in the most beneficial manner if you don't realize that there are things about you that are indifferent to your goals and your wants that you will not control at all, and the best thing that you can do is find a way to express them in different means, but that you will only create schisms and Freudian complexes very really in the truest sense of the description by trying to constantly have dominion over yourself. And I can admit, as somebody who is perfectionistic and has a very strong tendency to be discontented with self and always in a constant state of striving, to where I even have a lack of mercy and empathy towards my weaknesses and my fears and my sorrows, essentially, that I will consistently drive myself even at the expense of self. I realized that even that component was not something I came up with. Nobody taught me that. It's really strange. I've been like that since I was very, very young, and I don't know necessarily why I am this way. But I know very really for me to disavow it or to go to a shrink and have them anesthetize me, essentially with medication in some way, is not at all going to help me in finding any real meaning or salience to my existence. I think that the paradoxical nature that life is really leaves people befuddled and confused. But I think that the confusion arises because we are in such a state of panic and perpetual comparativeness with ourselves and others, and in this forever unending game of trying to one-up the self or have an I and play big brother either to others or to ourselves. Even in the Eastern thought, insofar as that you actualize yourself to some extent and sit as the higher self. Even when I propose self-actualization, I do not mean self-actualization as in you will ever be in control of yourself. I think the only way you really actualize yourself is understanding you will not be in control of yourself, and that you will not suddenly be some new agency or have some greater consciousness to you, because I think that there is a very real accidental nature to reality, and that there is a multifaceted and very multifarious nature to it, insofar as that there are many layers to it, as if it were a lotus or an onion peel, and you cannot separate and partition them in singular manners when you're talking about the subjective experience. That is why science distances itself from subjectivity, and that is why logic distances itself from subjectivity, and why I distance myself from subjectivity when I am making conclusions and decisions about how systems of knowledge ought to be organized. But since I have entered the arena of thought on psychology and existence, the absolute tenet and conception that I have had to swallow, as difficult as it can be for me as a rational individual, is that people are fundamentally dualistic and multiplistic in nature, insofar as that they are not rational things. That there is a very real polarity in the schematization of the brain between two thinking systems that people and most organisms occupy in a very broad-reaching, turbulent nature, in a very linear, convergent, dissecting, analytical framework. That there is two servants, if you will, that there are two angels on the shoulder, and I'm not saying that as in one is good or one is bad, but that the Taoists had this right, that there are two aspects that make up the whole, and there are small fragments and pieces of each and the other, and that this consistent manic running from one end of the spectrum to the other is at bottom the ruin, I think, in Western civilization in many ways. That there has been a complete lack thereof of balancing between the two domains and frontiers of existence, that the intuitive space, the rational space, the empirical space, and the interpretive space do not exist in any collective harmony with one another, and are always in contention, because we think ourselves to be more than just mere mammals of a certain variety that will have contention and argument and displeasure with one another. I think it is when one realizes that they very really will hate their brother for no good reason that one can police and license themselves to be their brother's keeper. It's when one thinks that they're always their brother's keeper, or that they always have good intentions, or that they have a right to who they are or what they are per se, by way of any constitution, no more than any accident or circumstantial happenstance, by way of the dice thrown within nature's random distribution of traits, that you get such great calamity per se. I wish that the time for ideologies, for the seeking and disavowal of being would come, that there would be an advent and a dying of this age, insofar as that there be an emergent phenomenon, and us realizing really where we are at. We have the ability to explore and catapult ourselves through the cosmos, and we have a taste for the awe-inspiring and the numinous, but we are very much wretched things, and of sickly nature and caprice and misanthropy and malevolent and villainous intent towards one another for very subconscious and petty reasons. We cannot ever get away from the fact that we are primates, essentially, and that our closest relatives, chimpanzees, are essentially thugs. You know, they do raid other troops just for the mere enjoyment of violence, and that this thought that it's any one thing per se, that it's the patriarch, or that it's the emasculation, or that it's the greed, or that it's the capitalistic structure, or that it's the socialistic um, uh, denial or delusionalism, or that it's the social constructivism, or that it's the just complete biological innate deterministic factors, that it's just one or the other, and that it's not a collection and aggregation of so many different properties per se that fall down to, that can be converge essentially to the main point that we are human and we're limited in a lot of ways, and complicated insofar as that we are very really an amalgamation of competing drives, independent in competing drives, that tend towards a direction that has an idea of wholeness. We are agents and we are singular entities, but we're not that way in the way so many spontaneous people accept. There is a part of you that is completely indifferent to you. That I don't know if people quite pick up on what I'm saying sometimes in these videos, but that we will get nowhere. Well, I won't say nowhere. We're certainly getting somewhere. We're going to continue to head somewhere. And I think people aren't going to necessarily realize where it is we go when we think that being indifferent, being nihilistic, being social justice warriors, or being members of the papacy, or being members of government, or being members of whatever agency you could think that had the idea of being of the scientific community. There is no divine agency that is going to usher us in to utopian frontier. That is the fantastical wish fulfillment of infantilism in this culture, and I don't think it's innate per se in human nature. I don't really know when it came around, but I do think this, that the gross fantastical pictures that we have continued to create, mythology served its place, and it still has a place in helping us be able to understand our place in the cosmos, essentially. And if anything that I do miss from Christian thought is that man is the center of his world, but he is not the center of the universe, and that very really the heart has its place, but it should not run unfettered because it's not necessarily good. That nothing is necessarily good in and of itself, and that there truly is nothing wrong, but not everything is profitable per se. And if I miss anything, and if I miss anything else from the mythological age, is that there is no such thing as a vacuum, or every being completely devoid of one's responsibility to the fraternity that is humanity. We can carry on and insist on being so immature and I would say naive in spirituality, insofar as this, that if you think that the point of unlocking your chakras, or reaching enlightenment, or finding salvation, or finding God, or being with the higher self, or the whatever Gnostic precept that, or New Age, whatever would have you, is out there, is any more necessary than bringing you to the end of yourself so that you can see how it is you are a part of this world and are something very small within it, that do you think that there is any point other than learning to be and live with one another, then you don't know what spirituality is. You don't have to be metaphysical, I don't think, to have a wisdom to yourself that pervades the spirit, pervades the ethos of most spiritual texts in Sanskrit. And that is this, that if you ever think the game is completely about you, and that you only exist within a context per se, by way of the reflective qualities of your own subjective experience against the subjective experience of others, you don't exist. But you don't exist because you exist in the subjective notion of yourself and the continuous subjective impressions that you receive from the world and others around you. That your picture is something constructed by your brain, and you are construction by the genetic material of things that were eons and ages before yourself. That any trait that you have is fairly accidental and nothing you really worked for per se. That, gifts or whatever you would say that you came into life with, or whatever curses or something that you came into life with, they are your burden, but they're not your concern. It's like, if you can't get out of your way, or if we can't get out of our way, we are only going to seek ruin and destruction. If you can't see, I think that the gross distinctions, I'm an atheist, I really am, despite some of the things I say. I'm an atheist insofar as this, that I don't believe in any supernatural entities or anything like that. But I don't look at a Christian and I don't see something completely foreign and disgusting or repulsive as an individual. I don't look at the Hindu or the Buddhist or the Muslim or any other thing and find a villain. I don't think they're my brother necessarily either. I don't think that either. I don't think that per se that the individuality of existence should ever be lost, and I don't think that the collective should ever be championed. But I think very really that we have a difficult time in just being, never not ceasing in striving per se. Not that there is no need for industry, not that there is no need for personal enterprise or conscientiousness or rational investigation or innovation and insight, because if we are going to continue to exist and proliferate as a species, we certainly have to work out very real parameters and constraints that have presented themselves to us because of our very immature and rather rambunctious, bombastic run at the technological and industrial age that we live in. But it is to say that if you cannot hold a place for the emptiness of existence in one space, for the futility in your own life, per se, insofar that we are only here for but a moment, and if you cannot also see that it is a true honor to be something that is sentient and burdened with existence, if you can't hold a space for the totality of existence, not insofar that you will ever be it or any one person will ever be it, but that there is a very real ecology in the personalities, characteristics, and aspects and expressions of human existence that is wholly necessary, and we are only but a part in this larger collection, then give up, I think, having any real thought or idea that there is any hope for humanity outside of humanity's own realization that it is not what it thinks it is in many vantage points and perspectives, and should just be. And I say just be, and maybe I should explicate what I mean by this. And it's not as simple as being yourself, because nothing is that simple, because you shouldn't be yourself, per se, because you're not completely good. No one is. But do the sacred dance that any admirable person did before yourself. Honor the self, honor culture, and deal with the contentious and exhaustive elements of life without letting yourself become resentful, jaded, cynical, cowardice, petty, wrathful, exorbitant, gluttonous, power hungry, and nihilistic. Realize that it is not by way of you being anything amazing or good that is ever going to make you the person that you need to be. And I guess that is if you care about meaning or fulfillment in life. But those are my thoughts, and I find it very rare that I agree with things that people say or the way things have been. History has been a... Now, this is something else I don't get, per se, when people say that there has been no progress. We have certainly made progress, because history has been a very bloody and ugly thing up to this point. But I think that we are at a very real nexus point insofar that we have a very serious technological omnipotence and capacity and potential for mass destruction and rampant dehumanization on a scale that we have never seen, that we really need to put some brakes on ourselves and just take stock and stop being so dang unwise about things. I miss wisdom in some respects, but I don't know. This is a rant, but those are some thoughts, and this is the last video I'm going to make of this variety, because I'm not a prophet and I'm not a preacher. I can't stand to watch the world burn per se, but I don't want to control people or necessarily tell anybody what to do, but it's enormously frustrating to be the person I am in this world sometimes. But I'm a part of it, so it is what it is. So that's my video. You probably don't agree with it, you probably don't like it, and it probably offended you, but that's the way things go sometimes.